Hi everyone, this is Yana Smakula sharing a new video tutorial for Altenew. Today I'm going to be making a floral card with a beautiful quote. I'll share a way to create patterned paper using stamps and also make matching embellishments for a card using the same stamps and matching dies. I'll also talk about how you can tone down or mute a background by simply using a layer of vellum, and we'll also share a couple of tricks and tips along the way. So let's jump right in. I'm going to be using three beautiful products from Altenew, a stunning vintage rose set. I think this particular one is loved and owned by very many of you. A set of beautiful sentiments called Sentiments and Quotes. The quotes in this one are truly the best. And I also have a new product from Altenew which was introduced yesterday, and that is a set of matching dies. I'm going to be using 3 sets of roses for my card today. You can use more. There are 5 different roses in this set, but I'm only going to use 3 larger ones. Now, these are no regular rose stamps. Each one has 3 to 4 parts or layers that you can each stamp one on top of the other to create one stunning and very realistic looking rose. You can see that they are outlined with a black border on the backing sheet to help you see which part belongs to which rose, so that makes it very easy to understand what goes where. Now, this might look like a very complicated set, and I know that some people don't like these building type stamp sets because of how complicated they look, but I'm telling you, using these is not only easy but also fun. Since the roses that I'm going to be using have 4 layers, one has 3 layers, I need 4 colors or 4 shades of one color of ink. I want these to be yellow, so I've picked 4 colors of yellow and orange ink that I will be using to stamp these roses. I have soft vanilla ink from Hero Arts, the lightest one, a slightly darker butter bar, also from Hero Arts, a sunshine yellow ink. This one is a tiny bit more vibrant. It's from Simon Says Stamp. And finally, pumpkin pie, my darkest color, which kind of is like a muted orange, I would say. Now, all of these are dye inks, but pigment inks will also work great with this stamp set, and hybrid inks will work well too. So I'm going to start with the lightest color, the soft vanilla, and I'm going to stamp the base layer of my roses. I'm going from light to dark. So I'm starting with the largest part of the rose design, and I'm using a lightest color of ink for that. I'm going to stamp all 3 roses onto my panel, and by the way, this is just a regular white cardstock cut to about 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I will be trimming it down a bit later. I'm only going to show you how I'm stamping one rose cluster consisting of 3 roses and several leaves, but I'm going to fill the entire background with clusters like this one. I didn't want this video to be forever long, so I'm only focusing on a small part of my background, and then you can simply duplicate it. You can stamp all the roses at once if you want, but I find it easier to stamp individual clusters like this one to better plan my background. I'm also overlapping my roses, and I'm not doing any masking for this. I don't want any white space there in between the roses and my clusters, so I'm making sure to overlap the images just a bit. After my base layer is done, the base layer of the rose, and remember I used the lightest color of ink and the largest stamp from the group, I'm going to move to the second largest stamp and the second lightest ink. So I'm going from large to small and from light to dark. Again, I'm doing the same thing. I'm inking my rose layers using butter bar ink and stamping them on top of the first layer. At this point, you might think that you need to be very careful to align everything perfectly and make sure you stamp that second layer in the exact spot that it was meant to be stamped. Well, you don't. These roses allow for that imperfect stamping, and that makes them even more interesting. You don't have to align the second, third, and fourth layers perfectly on top of the previous one. No, as long as you are stamping on top of the previous one and have the stamp facing generally in the same way or in the same direction, you're good to go. You will see me quickly stamping those roses, and I'm not spending much time trying to figure out if I have my stamp in the perfect spot, so don't worry about it. You will also notice that after each image is stamped, it looks a lot more vibrant, and then it loses some of its color. This is perfectly okay with the kind of ink that I'm using. It loses a bit of the color, and it also blends a bit into the previous layer, or even bleeds a bit, making these stamped roses even better. I love it. By the time I need to stamp the third layer, I'm going to place my stamps on top of the previously stamped rose layers and mount all of them at once onto my clear block to save time. I was planning to do that from the start, but because I had roses overlapping there, I couldn't mount them all together, so I had to stamp the first 2 layers individually. Now these really start to look like stunning roses with shadows and highlights. And the best part is, these were amazingly easy to make. There's no way in the world I would have been able to achieve that much dimension by using markers or watercolor or paints or anything else. I am just not good at coloring. But this is by far the most simple way to achieve a gorgeous look with very little effort. So now I simply need to stamp the 4th layer, and only 2 of my roses have that 4th layer. So again, I'm placing my stamps onto the stamped images, mounting them all at once onto my clear block, and inking with the darkest ink color that I have selected for my project, which is a pumpkin pie. I'm also going to stamp several leaves around my roses to finish this cluster. I'm using just 2 colors of ink this time, but I'm going to come in with a 3rd one later. So again, if your outline stamp on the backing sheet has 3 parts, you'll need to use 3 colors of ink or 3 shades of ink for best results. You can use 2 if you only have 2. It's also going to look good, but it's not going to have that much dimension. So after my first cluster is ready, I'm going to continue stamping my roses and leaves, filling the entire panel and creating the look of the pattern paper. These stamps are done so expertly that whenever people who have no idea about stamping look at this, they think that this is a printed paper instead of a stamped image. You can have only 1 cluster like this one and maybe just add a sentiment and have a rather simple card, or you can create an entire background and layer a couple of additional elements. I also want to create matching embellishments for my project. I've stamped these same roses and leaves onto white cardstock, and now I'm going to use matching dies from Altenew to cut those out. You can see that there is a die for each of the finished roses. You don't have a die for each of the layers as you don't need it, only a die for a finished flower. So I'm going to place these matching dies on top of my stamped roses as I normally would and tape them in place. I'm going to send them through my Artisan Explorer machine and cut them out to create roses to use as matching embellishments for my card. Once cut, these look absolutely stunning. Now my stamped and die-cut roses were done using the same colors of ink, and therefore they look identical. So if I place the die-cut roses on top of the stamped ones, they are going to get lost. I'm going to add a layer of vellum to tone down my stamped background a bit. This is going to force the colors under the vellum to look less vibrant and will help the die-cut roses to be the center of attention while still having that identical background underneath. I'm going to stamp a sentiment, or actually quote, that I think will work perfectly on a card like this. I'm stamping it using VersaFine Onyx Black ink onto vellum. Now, this is a very slow drying ink. Well, it's not a very slow drying ink, but it's going to be a very slow drying ink on vellum, and it will eventually dry on vellum, but it's going to take a really long time. If you handle your card carefully, you should be able to finish it and not smear the ink. This was almost the case for me. My card was almost done and then I smeared a part of that sentiment. So I had to go back and stamp another vellum panel, but I used Hero Art's black dye ink. It's not as rich as the VersaFine one, but it's going to dry almost instantly on vellum and you won't have to worry about smearing. You can also use StazOn ink for this, or maybe heat emboss your sentiment using black embossing powder. So even though I'm stamping using VersaFine ink, I re-stamped it later using Hero Art's dye ink. Now here comes the fun part. I want this sentiment to be continued onto my die-cut roses. You can see that that quote didn't fit on the vellum panel, and it's okay. It's going to be continued onto the roses. Sounds a bit difficult, right? Well, really it isn't. I'm going to bring each of the rose pieces to my vellum panel and make note in my head as to where I want it placed. I will look at the words on my quote and see which need to be stamped on the rose. I will also make note of the angle and the placement of my rose. This might sound very difficult or complicated, but really it isn't. Basically, just remember where the quote needs to be stamped on the rose, then go ahead and stamp it. Once you have the first rose stamped, go ahead and adhere it in place using foam adhesive and match the stamped quote on the rose to the stamped quote on the vellum. Then go ahead and do the same thing with the second rose. Note the placement and stamp the quote. Again, use foam adhesive and attach it in place. Finally, stamp the same quote onto your third rose and adhere that one in place also. Do not try to stamp the quote onto all 3 die-cut roses at once. You will never get it looking good. It's best to stamp each individually and just pull all 3 together like puzzle pieces. All we have to do now is to adhere the leaves behind the roses. I used multi-matte medium from Ranger to adhere those. While the glue is drying, I'm going to add my stamped panel onto an A2 tab folding card base, which I made out of black cardstock. And as soon as I have that ready, I can go ahead and adhere my vellum panel on top. I also added a few gray enamel dots to my card, and that finished my project for today. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below or in the blog post. Please remember to subscribe to this channel to watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching. Bye!